Patti Chan, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Sam. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so we have had the great opportunity to be a part of a coaching mastermind that I got together to grow our businesses and support each other. And so I've gotten to get to know you, Patty, a lot better these past few weeks, which I'm excited now to share Patty with everyone else because I think you're pretty awesome.
It has been such a blast getting to know you and the other folks in our mastermind. So thank you. What an honor. What an honor to get to be shared by you, Sam.
Of course, but let's start off then. Patty, tell us about you. Who are you and what led you to executive coaching?
Yeah. Well, I am a product leadership coach, which may be surprising to maybe this audience. Similar to you, Sam, I'm certified and trained through the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute, but I chose to specialize in something called product leadership coaching, harking back on my past nearly 2 decades being a product leader working in tech startups. Does it help to
Hmm.
define what even a product leader is? I know some people
Would
just
you
look at me.
please? Because there's a lot of intuition going on with what that means.
I get that sometimes. People are just like, what does that even mean? So I'll start off by even just defining product. Think about your favorite app or something that you use, like Airbnb or Spotify. Well, that app experience, what features you have, how it works, all those decisions are made by someone. And in many cases, made by multiple someones. And those someones are called product managers. And at companies where there's many product managers, there is a leader who oversees that department. So whether it is a director, a VP, or a chief product officer, that is what I mean by a product leader. So they will define the multi-year vision for where the product, that app, or that experience ultimately goes. And then different parts of that product will get owned by individual product managers to carry out their own kind of feature roadmap, if you will. But somebody brings together the overall vision and strategy for how that product, that app, that experience evolves. So, as a product leadership coach, I work with directors, VPs, founders sometimes, or CPOs who are responsible for that department. And works especially with startups since that's kind of where I come from.
Okay. Tell us more about that. Tell me more about that experience of growing as a product leader and into a product leader coach.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've been in product for nearly 2 decades. I started as a product designer or a web designer, but I had taught myself how to code in high school. And so coming out of college, I didn't go to school for this. I was a psych major, but coming out of college, I wanted to be a designer. And so I got a job at a software consulting multimedia company in Baltimore, Maryland. And I was designing websites. I was designing websites for the local like hospitality industry, like all sorts of different websites. And at some point they realized, oh, you can code. So why don't you code your websites? You can design them and you can build them. Great. And then they eventually realized that I was able to translate all the complex technical stuff to friendly layman's terms for our clients. And so they allowed me to create our first project management department at this multimedia software consulting company. And so I became a project manager. And so over time, being a project manager evolved into being a product manager, especially when I started working in house for product companies, as opposed to being the consultant being brought in. I also founded my own startup somewhere in there, and that was also more of a foray into product management. But yeah, that's how I got started. And then, eventually in the second half of my career, was promoted to director of product, VP of product at increasingly later stage, more successful companies. And most notably, I was VP of product at Imperfect Foods, which some people may recognize.
Mm,
They're amazing company that's delivering groceries, online groceries, all fighting food waste as a mission.
mm,
And I was, yeah, VP of product for this grocery delivery company during a pandemic. I joined, yeah, I joined the company prior to the pandemic, 2 years before the pandemic, when it was, just local to the Bay Area and small, very loyal fan base. And in the 3 years that I was there, we grew 26x hyper growth to become a half a billion annual revenue company. And that was my check the box. That was
mm,
I made it. I have wanted to hit that home run, make a really big impact. And after that experience, especially, feeding 200,000 families a week in groceries during a pandemic, I went, okay, I'm good. I checked the box. Like, I did it. I did what I set out to do. And so I took another job after that, but already the seed had been planted that, I'm good. I don't need the glory anymore. What I am fueled by, what lights me up during my week is helping other people thrive
mm,
and have the amazing career that I did. And so that's what led me to start coaching on the side while still working full time,
mm.
and to eventually, 1 year ago, go full time into my coaching practice.
Wow. Okay. That we have a great understanding
I said a
of
lot there.
the incredible career that you've had. I'm curious to know how far back does this inkling towards coaching? Because I mean, the product side doesn't necessarily connect in my mind with coaching. So how did these things come together for you?
Well, I think any leader, any manager who's had direct reports or even team members who are seeking mentorship, they have the opportunity to coach. And I think prior to training, we may conflate coaching with mentorship, with advising, but some semblance of helping somebody get from where they are today to where they want to be tomorrow. And I certainly was fortunate enough to have that opportunity with people on my team and also people in other departments who would maybe come and ask me for advice. And I just really loved it. I loved the one on ones that I had with team members. I loved being able to share things that I had learned that might help them have an easier time. And so when I opportunistically got a message on LinkedIn from total stranger, did not know this person.
Okay.
They asked if they could pick my brain because they wanted to either work at Imperfect Foods or find a way to kind of switch into an industry that was more aligned with their own personal interests.
Mm,
And I got to chatting with this person. I said, yes, why not? And it got a lot deeper than that. It became more around, I'm at a real impasse in my life. I don't know if I want to stay with product management. I think this is what I want. I don't know if it exists. How do I get there? And because I had already been intrigued by coaching, I went, hey, full transparency. This is the first time I'm doing this. I'm not a certified coach or anything, but I am thinking of offering coaching. and I'll do it pro bono. If you're game, I'm game." And they said yes. So they were my first coaching client.
Wow.
And even when I, again, went on to take another full time role, and I told them, well, I'd probably be ramping down, they actually convinced me to stay on as their coach. And I ended up working with that person for over a year.
Wow. You know, you bring up a great point, and one thing that I was speaking to Aaron Tobacco about on a previous episode was how often people who are in transition or experiencing crisis
Mm.
or trying to answer big questions about their life, they tend to benefit from having someone to lean on as a thought partner, as someone that can just be there to listen sometimes and let them just get the spaghetti out of their head of all the thoughts and options that they have. What about on your side? When you talk about you enjoyed one-on-ones, I know plenty of people who dread one-on-ones. What about this kind of one-on-one connection was so appealing to you?
Well, I might do one-on-ones a little bit differently.
Sure.
So when I have my product teams, I would have 2 meetings a week. And depending on what the role was, sometimes maybe one of those meetings was bi-weekly instead of weekly, details. But one meeting wasn't called the one-on-one, it was called a product review session. And we would concentrate on the work. We would go, all right, how are we tracking to our goals? Are we on track? Do we need to course correct? And then there was the one-on-one. The one-on-one was stepping back. Hey, how are you feeling about the team dynamics? Hey, what's going on with that person that you told me about last week that you just feel like you're butting heads with? Hey, where are you feeling your career? Where do you feel like you need to grow? Are you still excited to be here? What would make you more excited? And because these are more personal conversations, naturally, we start to get to know each other better. And so, also, sometimes what comes in is I don't know whether my partner and I want to still stay here in this geographic area. We're thinking of moving, but I'm afraid of being away from the office. Am I going to lose out
Mm,
if I'm more remote? And so it starts to bring in life too. And I think there's something that's really special that happens when you start knowing somebody holistically, when you start adding all the different dimensions of who they are and what their life is like. And I think that's what's always brought me a lot of joy is uncovering the fullness of who someone is and also allowing myself to share increasingly the fullness of who I am, right? That's been a lifelong work of mine. Not great at, not perfect at it yet by any means.
sure.
But that's been something that I've worked on over the decades.
Mm, I want to get to that, but first let me ask you, there are so many work situations where someone may feel like, yeah, I want to get to know this other person on my team, or
Mm,
as a team leader, I want to know my teammates better. But I'm unsure about boundaries and expectations. I don't want to
mm.
overstep. I don't want to feel like I'm coming on strong or something like that. What has been your experience in feeling out the steps toward that, knowing someone else as a whole person? What
Yeah.
steps do we take there?
Oh, that's such a good question, Sam. I think before we aim to know somebody else, we sometimes have to be the first one that extends that olive branch or extends that vulnerable step forward.
Mm,
So before, if you're seeking to know someone fully, how willing are you to show yourself fully? What
Mm,
is what is the circle of what feels very easy and comfortable and safe and traditional for you to share? And then what's something that's just barely on the line of that circle or maybe just a little bit out of it?
mm.
And are you willing? Do you have the courage to share that little bit?
Hey, we're all about that here on this show.
Right? Well, and check in with yourself, check in with your body. Does it feel safe to do so? There are certain people who you're going to feel more safe to open up to than others, and respect that. I don't think that there's any glory in pushing ourselves just for the sake of vulnerability, just for the sake of sharing. We're not talking about that. But let's say that you do trust this person, you feel safe with this person. What's that little something that you can share that might have the potential to open up doors for connection? I think that's how it begins.
And I love that because so often, for instance, being myself a more future oriented and visionary person, it can be easy to get caught up in the idea of the grand outcome that I'm after. If I
Yeah.
want to build a relationship, I want to imagine like, yeah, we're buddy buddy and there's some professional intimacy there. We trust each other. We can talk about things that are real. And then I look at where we were actually at, and there's a big gap there. So, like you're saying, practicing a bit of exposure therapy techniques, just pare it down, scale it down to what is something that you could actually manage that would require just a bit of courage to accomplish, and then go from there. I love it.
Yeah, I love that. I think sometimes what happens, and this just I just experienced this recently. We do have a purpose. You're right. There's usually some outcome, some goal. It might be as simple as intellectually we know that if we have better rapport and relationships with our coworkers, we're going to be able to collaborate more efficiently and ultimately get better outcomes. Yeah, we know that. And so sometimes, if that's all we're going by, okay, we're checking off the boxes so that we can get these great outcomes and build rapport, we might start to break our conversations or our one on ones down into a formula. The first 10 minutes, we chit chat about something outside of work and we kind of look at the clock. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes. Need to make a hard switch over to, all right, so yesterday's meeting. Or what are we going to do about this new launch? And that doesn't feel good, right? Because it doesn't feel natural. And so, are there moments where we can lean in a little bit more or even call it out? Say, hey, especially if this is a networking conversation. Hey, I noticed that the energy just shifted. We're talking about all your offerings right now, but I'm not sure I follow. Can we Yeah, I'd love to connect a little bit more first before we really get into the nitty gritty so that you can know me better, I can know you better, and then we can better help each other.
Mm, I love that. I've found recently, even personally, that having the courage to take the first step, usually that fear or anxiety you might feel prior to it really does fizzle away into
Yeah.
nothing by the time you take it. Because I've recently reconnected with friends from I haven't spoken to since high school, and they were so excited to reconnect. And I got connected with a bunch of friends that we hadn't talked to, and the network just keeps growing and reactivating. But they were just so grateful that I
Yeah.
reached out, that I took the first step. And I think in so many
Yeah.
ways, we can talk about leadership in so many different ways, but in the end, initiative is such a big piece of that. But it can be small in its own way as well.
I love that. It can be small. Yeah, it can
Hmm.
be.
So, Patty, tell us more about how you learned about yourself, how you came into who you are.
Oh, goodness. Okay, well, I'm going to tell a story that
Mm.
will link the product leadership to my coaching journey as well. So I started when I went full time into my coaching. I knew I wanted to leverage the past nearly 2 decades of experience that I had had. I didn't want to just start over. But what's happened in the last year, which I did not expect to happen, is that I continued to niche down and niche down and niche down. And
Ah.
now, at least in my one on one coaching practice, I work solely with historically marginalized product leaders, majority women and BIPOC, and especially women of color who are leading product design and engineering in growth stage startups. But I didn't start there.
Right.
And what it took to get here was a owning and stepping into who I authentically am, which I was afraid to do. So, oh gosh, okay. I'm gonna go into the story.
Do it.
I think this is
We're
the first
here.
time that I'm really telling this full story. So,
Oh, exclusive. Thank you.
um, so I was in product, I was in the consulting world, and it was fun. I learned a whole lot. So this was the first 10 years of my career. But about 10 years in, I got pretty burned out. I got burned out from, I think, the more run of the mill, consulting projects. You ship out a project every 6 to 9 months and then you'd get a new one. And I never felt like I got to live with any one of the projects,
Mm.
products that I was building. It's like I got to birth them, but I didn't get to raise them. And
Huh.
that made me sad.
Sure. Interesting. Yeah.
But beyond that, and this took me years to realize, looking back, I was also really burned out because I was putting on a mask every day.
Hmm.
So, as a woman of color in tech, I was frequently the only person who looked like me in the room. Think about your stereotypical engineers. I was coding, I was product manager. And certainly as I got more senior, I was a managing director at um, one of these large consulting companies. And at like 28, 29, I was managing director. Like, definitely nobody who looked like me. Didn't look like me in gender, in ethnicity, in age, nothing. And so what I learned to do was to act like everybody else. So
Hmm.
I learned how to like whiskey, and I could name my favorite bourbons and why this bourbon was better than a different bourbon. I talked a certain way, very alpha, assertively. This is something I'm not proud of. I learned to talk over people. I learned to cut people off because if I didn't, I wasn't ever going to speak up in a meeting because nobody ever asked me what I thought. I had to cut people off in order to speak. And I didn't really like any of that stuff. I mean, I enjoy bourbon, sure, but like I would rather have a frosé.
Okay.
And it it really didn't register clearly at the time, but that pretending takes a toll on you. It took a toll on me. And so I left tech wholesale. I thought, all right, tech is just not for me. And I left to go into food for a year and a half. So I
Hmm.
was a chef. I had
Oh.
my own I had my own underground supper club. I became a director of events and operations, throwing 100-person dinners at the Ferry Building in San Francisco.
Wow.
A lot of fun. And it was probably a little telling that in my own underground supper club, in my menu where I was the chef, I was making all the food from my childhood that
Mm.
my Cantonese mother and grandmother would make for me when I was a kid. So it was this very visceral way of coming back to who I actually am, coming back to my roots. Fast forward a year and a half, I did come back to tech. I found my way into a food startup, and from there eventually went to Imperfect Foods. And so I stayed in food and food tech for quite a while. And I learned a couple of things about myself. One is that I had actually never gotten tired of tech. I love having the scale of impact that I get to have. You launch a product and people all over the world are using it. It's
Mm.
amazing. That is eh, awe-inspiring and a little addictive.
Mm.
So that was something that actually never went away in terms of my motivation and what really charged me. But that product has to align with my own personal values and interests and passions. So that was the first big thing that I learned about myself. And then I learned all sorts of things that allowed me to eventually get to the point where I was a VP without burning out, without compromising who I was, without removing my authenticity. And it took years to really crack that. But I did. I figured it out. And I didn't realize that there was anything remarkable about that. I just thought, well, this is my life. This is, who cares? Until I went through the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute program, and I was being coached by a fellow person in my cohort. And Tom Nelms, who is a faculty coach there, he was observing and at the end gave feedback to this person who was coaching me that they had maybe missed an opening. An opening in coach parlance is something that a coachee says that sounds like it's an off the hand comment, but actually might be really meaningful. And you want to dig into that. And Tom went, hey, Patti said this thing. I came back. I think that that might have been an opening. And at that point, he turns to me, looks me in the eyes, and he went, you came back and you figured it out. He repeated those words back to me, and I started crying. I mean, I'm choking up right now. And so that is what led me to finally being not only a product leadership coach that folds in a lot of executive coaching, but particularly working with women and BIPOC, women of color, because I did. I came back and I figured it out. And if I can help empower people, help people find their way in a way that kind of avoid some misery that
Mm.
makes it just a little bit easier. I want to do that because I want to reverse the tide of women, people of color, women of color leaving this industry. And the reason why that is so important to me is because products, I mean, it's wild how many products that we use in a day, but how many of those products are built by somebody who looks like you? And so we need the voices and influence of these amazing people so that our everyday lives are actually more representative of who we are. That's why I care about this so much.
W- You mentioned a number of times now that you figured it out, that you came back. How? What did that part look like?
Whew. Well, so I shared one of the things already. which is, oh, the missing piece was me working on a product, me showing up every day to a job that aligned with my own personal values and interests. That was a big one. And I've gotten to be able to do that for the last, what, 8 years. And then certainly coaching definitely aligns with that. And then the other two things were, one, I realized that I had worked really, really hard throughout a lot of my career to be liked instead of being respected.
Differentiate
And
those.
yeah, so to be liked was because I felt this lack of belonging. Oh, I'm the only person who looks like me in this room. Oh, I don't feel entirely like I belong. I wanted to feel like I belonged. I wanted to be invited out to coffee. I wanted to be included in the meetings. I wanted to have friends. And that's not to say that those things are bad, not at all. What a great cherry on top if we can have that in our workplace, friends and camaraderie. And I did have that. But it was something that probably took up more of my brain cells than was really productive for anyone, including me. Because once I started focusing on, wait, how do I do a really great job in my role? And not only a great job in my role dictated by the standards of other people, but my own standards. So, what happens is, and this is what I work with my coachees a lot on. What happens is, if you can take an honest look at where your maybe skill gaps are or where you want to be growing and work on that, theoretically, you'll start seeing outcomes. You'll see, goals being hit, team morale going up, etc. You earn respect for that. And guess what? People that desire to be liked or that desire to be included or that desire for connection, that kind of naturally happens
Mm.
because it's a workplace. And when you're doing great for the company, then I find that people do want to celebrate you for that. And they do want to work with you more. And they do want your opinion on things. And so working to be respected, A, doesn't waste the brain cells of trying to figure out, does somebody like me? Do they like me? Do they want to include me? Am I included? Because there's no way for you to know that unless you go up to somebody point blank and say, hey, what do you think of me as a person?
Yeah.
You don't know. And so if you're torn up about, oh, I'm not included, I'm not part of whatever that club there, it's all projection. You don't even know whether it's true or not. And so I learned to kind of focus first on earning respect first, most from myself and then from others, and then worrying less about what other people thought about me or whether they liked me or not. Um, and then what's the last thing? The last thing is that I also learned how to better boundaries and how to recharge my batteries daily instead of what a lot of us do, which is recharge our batteries on the weekend or recharge our batteries in that vacation that we take twice a year. And so that allowed me to just, in really demanding, fast paced jobs, still come back to myself at the end of every
Mm.
day.
One thing I've been learning about myself recently is for all of the future orientation I might have and the ability to carve a way towards that better world, the blind spot that comes with that perhaps is I can be unaware or even dismissive at times of my own past and
Mm,
things I've been learning towards what I hear you talking about. I would use the word integrity. What I hear
mhm,
in your story of gaining a greater sense of integrity, and for me, gaining a better sense of integrity for myself, it's included simple things like realizing, oh, this type of music reminds me of my parents, it reminds me of my childhood. These particular recipes, nothing special,
mm.
but I don't remember the last time I ate this, so I'm going to make it again and just enjoy it. And so connecting with all of ourself is something that when we talk about integrity, I've heard it so often termed or framed in a sense of being reliable or being predictable so
Mm,
that people can trust you. And I think that's certainly part of it. But what I hear being talked about in this instance is the amount of energy we burn being outside of integrity. When we can reclaim that and access it again, it gives us a zest for life. It gives us the energy and
yeah.
the positive attention, the relationships that we were looking for to begin with when we were outside of it.
That's such an eloquent way to sum it up. And I think that definition, that reliability, that predictability, it is true and it still works here, right? It's just that in addition to reliability and predictability for others, how they expect us to act, can we have reliability and predictability for ourselves? Can we trust ourselves to reliably show up authentically the way that our insides wants to show up?
Wow. I know for a fact that those who feel outside of integrity right now or have developed a perhaps more acute awareness of it in this conversation, just for a second imagine this feeling that I'm feeling right now in my heart, that the satisfaction and the peace of mind that comes with trusting yourself. Thank you, Patti. Wow. What a great lesson.
Earlier you had said, can can we take that initiative and be the first to reach out or be the first to share something vulnerable that might, just be outside of that circle, of that comfort zone. And you were saying, this lovely moment that the other person receives it and they're just so grateful that you reached out and took that initiative. Well, what if one step further, let's say they reject you instead? Let's say that for whatever reason, it just doesn't land for them and it doesn't become a moment of connection. And what if that's okay? Because what if reaching out and taking the initiative and being vulnerable was just you being in integrity with yourself and you having your own back? And so there's just joy in even doing that, regardless of how somebody else takes it.
Mm, I love that because when my example of reaching out and having a great experience reconnecting with people I knew from my past, that to me did represent like what's the smallest step that I could take towards reaching out and activating my relationships, my network, because I had
Yeah.
spent so much time prior to that doing standard cold outreach techniques where it's a total different skill set, and there is an element of putting on a mask because you have to shield yourself from all the rejection because there's going to be a lot. And so contrasting those two things, like there is this part where if you're trying to talk to a stranger, you're probably going to get rejected, and you can deal with that, be prepared for that. But in the instance of attempting to reconnect with someone that you
Hmm.
do have a history with, there is some warmth there perhaps, but it's not working out right then and
Yeah.
there. To me, I see and have felt there's it's a lot easier for things to roll off your back when you know you're in integrity. It's
Yes.
not about it maybe, but I've found that typically it's not even about like managing the negative emotions because they don't happen because you know you're in
Yeah.
integrity.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Like 100% yes, because you're reaching out because that's who you want to be. You want to be a person who is unafraid to reach out, who has the courage to make connections and deepen connections. And whether somebody receives that and volleys that back at you has nothing to do with that intention to be that person who reaches out.
Mm, yeah. So Patty, how let's tie this back into we're going to be seeing each other at this coaches conference, and I want to know more about what you'll be presenting on.
Yeah. Well, so I was inspired by, I mean, essentially what Tom Nelms was able to do for me,
Mm,
which was listen to this story that I wasn't even realizing was a story. And he was able to reflect back, like, wait a second, that's your essence. And I wish I could say on the spot, I then knew what I was going to do as a coach and who I was going to serve. It did. It took like another 8 months before
mm,
it really sunk in and I really owned and embraced it. And so this session, it's not going to be an overnight. Oh my God, now I know who I am. This is my essence. But I'm hoping that it'll be a spark. And so what my session will be about is, what's your story? Who were you before you became a coach? When I was going through BECI, I heard so many people say, I am coming to this coaching now so brand new. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I'm starting over. I don't know anything. I don't have anything to offer. I don't have anything to bring. And it's so not true. Every single one of these people had entire careers before they became a coach. They lived an entire lifetime, if not multiple lifetimes. And it's that lifetime that's going to differentiate who they are as a coach. And it's from excavating from that lifetime where they're going to derive what their essence, what their unique essence is as a coach. And so my session is about doing exactly that. It's looking backwards and reflecting on what were the key moments that make you who you are. That then now, because especially, you and I both come from the Berkeley program, it's all about being an authentic coach, especially if your intention is to be an authentic coach, then kind of excavating from that past life is what's going to articulate what makes you exactly the authentic coach that you are. And so, how we story tell that, and we're going to have a chance to practice it with other people around us. Because, as you know, sometimes hearing somebody else play something back or be able to cherry pick that thing that you said gives you an aha moment. And so, there's going to be an opportunity to share your story, have it reflected back at you, and then also in the beginning, share some examples from people who've kind of gone through this exercise already, just to inspire and get everybody's creative juices flowing. Um, I can share about the format a little bit. That might be fun.
Let's
Should
hear
I do
it.
that? All right. So the format is inspired by something called Ignite. Sam, have
Hmm.
you ever heard of Ignite before?
I haven't.
Okay. So Ignite is a series of talks. So, in the same vein as the Moth, if you've heard of that, or like Story Slams, but the tagline is enlighten us, but make it quick. And these
Okay.
ignites happen all over the world. I used to host an Ignite in Baltimore, Maryland, and then I also hosted the Ignite in San Francisco many, many years ago. And it's a very specific format. You get 20 slides. Every slide automatically advances every 15 seconds
Okay.
for a total of 5 minutes. So enlighten us, but you've got 5 minutes to do it. And it's this very energetic, buzzy night. And when the audience leaves, you can hear almost every single person with their wheels turning. Oh my God, what would I say? What would I do an Ignite on?
Mm,
And that's the feeling that I'm hoping to have happen in this session. We're going to have a couple people in the beginning share their Ignite version of who they are as a coach and how they came to be that, how they hit on that essence of who they are as an authentic coach and how they would convey that if they had 5 minutes. And then hopefully in hearing those little snippets, folks around the room will also go, oh my gosh, what's my story? How would I convey my essence? How would I enlighten by inspiring people with who I am? How would
mm,
I tell that story? So that's what the session's going to be.
yeah. And tell me more about the power of that. I mean, you mentioned that people leave with a bunch of energy, but what what are some other benefits that come from that kind of exercise in this kind of session?
Sam, I think you're going to laugh because you and I had a kind of a chat about this recently.
That's what I'm sort of alluding to. We got to have a really cool conversation just earlier. You helped me out a lot, but please, in your own words.
So I think whenever we're embarking on any new role, any new elevator pitch, we're looking to the keywords that are traditionally associated with this role, this industry that we're going into. And so the pitch kind of ends up sounding like a resume or ends up
Mm,
in a worst case scenario. I've made this mistake. I kind of end up sounding like a car salesman only for product leadership or product management.
mm,
And sure, the words are recognizable, but it's got none of me in it. And so if you're describing who you are, what you do, what differentiates you to somebody who is evaluating you as a coach to hire for themselves, or somebody who is thinking of referring you to friends, people in their network, I don't think people refer generic carbon copies of what a stereotypical executive coach or whatever coach
mm,
is, right? They refer people. The analogy I use is when I refer a restaurant to somebody, I don't I don't name them the menu items. I talk about the atmosphere of the place, how I felt when I went there, the chef and their story that they came from Barcelona and there's this dish on the menu that's named after their mom, and it's those details, right? And so I think there's real power in being able to describe who we are, not only in that 2 sentence marketing elevator pitch, because sometimes you need that too, but if you have the opportunity to have more of a conversation with the person that you're talking to beyond the 20 seconds, then it's really storytelling that's going to make an impression on that person. And hopefully that impression is of who you really are authentically,
mm.
in this case, as a coach.
Yeah. I've noticed for all of the TED Talks and commencement speeches and all sorts of podcasts or other interviews that I've listened over the years, given some specific guest or whatever that I like to follow, I find that, again, similar to stand-up comedians, there's going to be a chunk of standard stories and facts that they like to share. But the thing is that the good ones are always able to, they might lead into it and we might get a canned response, but the best ones are the ones that contextualize that. They have it on
Yeah.
hand, but they can bring it into a conversation when it makes sense. And I think, speaking for me individually at least, sometimes we don't even have that first part. I don't have any canned responses to even pull from, even if I wanted to weave it into a conversation. And so getting that part straight comes before the the really cool natural conversations.
Yeah. When I first went into full-time coaching, there was this stint where I did a lot of career coaching. I worked with product leaders, engineering design leaders who were amidst that first or second wave of layoffs that had rippled across the
Hmm.
tech industry, and they were job searching. And an interview is really just an hour of forcing you to tell stories about yourself, right? Like that's really what an interview is. And to prepare for that, people need stories. And everybody would roll their eyes and just kind of grumble when I said, "All right, so think about, look back, walk down memory lane, and think about your highlights." Because the automatic assumption is I'm not interesting. I know I suffer from this all the time. Who am I? I'm not interesting. I'm so boring. Nobody wants to hear about me, but I make them. They have to do this. It's their homework.
Yeah.
And inevitably they do come out with stories. And they go, "Oh, this isn't half bad. I did do some really interesting things." And I think there's this beautiful process that happens that they start falling in love with themselves. They start getting interested in who they were and who they are. And then through coaching and soundboarding these stories, I'm also able to listen to something and go, "Wait, hold on. What did you just say? That is so interesting. That's a gem. That right there, you need to say that." And then they see even more of the amazing human that they are, right? The amazing life experience that they've had. Anyway, where I'm going with this is we all have stories. And I'm the first one that needs to hear that because again, I'm always like, I'm not interesting. Every single human is. Everybody has stories that are worth telling, that are worth finding interesting first in themselves and then sharing with the world so that others can gain and benefit from hearing that story as well. It's a gift.
Hmm. I love that. And I think I love looking for and finding ironies in life. And it tends to be that for whatever reason, sometimes the biggest mistakes we've made, the greatest pains that we've felt, can grow to become our crowning achievements,
Oh,
our
yeah.
mission. And I think about, as a dad and as a student of psychology, there's this funny little thing about our brain that is backwards from how you'd think of it, where if you had a newborn or a toddler, let's say, because they're much more rambunctious, but either way, they are drawing a lot of resources from you. There can be plenty, it doesn't have to be a kid, it can be any sort of responsibility or endeavor that you're trying to fulfill or honor. It's going to take a lot from you.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that your brain is trying to reason out why is Sam putting himself through so much for this thing that doesn't seem to be paying off right now. And it's probably not going to pay off for a while, whatever paying off looks like. Your brain tends to then reason that, oh, it must be because I love it. That's the only way I would put up with all of this.
Um,
And so some of the things that take the most from us are the things that we give the most to because actually it's something we love. And when we can come around to these points of wisdom where you and I are going to present either from a point of here are some mistakes that I made and what I learned, or here are some things that I really helped grow in other people, and here's how I can help you grow. That that irony is so satisfying to me because it's human.
well, and it's the hero's journey. It's what makes every single Disney movie a multi-million blockbuster hit.
Sure.
It's okay, here's his protagonist, and they have this, epic adventure where they become a hero, but they struggle. In every single one of these stories, there's a moment of deep struggle, and they don't know the right way out, or they don't know how it's gonna turn out, even. And then, of course, they work through it, they learn a lesson, and then, yay, they come out heroic. Um, but if there wasn't that struggle, how boring would that story be, right?
Sure.
We wouldn't watch that movie.
Yeah, that's true. And that's, again, you talk about how sometimes as coaches or as leaders, the advice that we give ends up being the exact advice that we need to take the most and be
Yes.
reminded of the most. And so when we are in the middle, when we are as Teddy Roosevelt wrote the poem about the man in the arena, when we are in the arena,
Yeah.
being there, doing it, we're not in the stands. We are
Yes.
in there, in the moment. It's okay to remind ourselves, oh, this is what hard feels like. But that means that I'm on the right track.
Yes.
Whether
Yes.
it's
That
as
means yes.
as hard as learning to know what's interesting about myself or some other thing. But yeah.
Oh my goodness. I love that you just quoted that. So Brene Brown quotes that all
Mm.
the time. I think it's like the first quote um, in her book, Daring Greatly. Is that her main book?
That,
Yeah.
yeah.
And she also shares something else that's similar along those lines. She says she's a shame researcher, right? And for some reason, she thought that as a shame researcher, if she just really, really understood shame, then she would be freed from ever having to feel it.
Ah.
And that's obviously not how it works out. And, even though she's a shame researcher who deeply understands shame and works with people, she herself still struggles through life like the rest of us. And it's still hard to be vulnerable, and it's still hard to be rejected, and it's still hard to do things that you regret and then you feel shameful about it. And yeah, it's I just thought that was so poignant that sometimes the thing that we learn and gravitate towards learning is the very thing that we need. And like you said, sometimes the thing that we gravitate towards coaching or teaching is the very thing that we ourselves need to hear and learn and be taught.
Mm. And in that, I think, yeah, one of the greatest ironies is when a coach is brought into a position of trust, it takes a lot of awareness and a lot of humility to be in that role for someone,
Yeah.
because it can be very easy to slip into, I'm just going to tell you what I think you should do mode. And that's often what I have people ask me to do straight out. Just tell me what to do.
Mhm.
But the power of coaching is in letting someone own their decisions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that to me is one of the reasons why I love coaching. But
Yeah.
to wrap up, I'll share the funny thing about having started this podcast and realizing prior to that that my number one core value personally is courage. I found
Mm.
in my research and now in my work that I keep bumping up against Brene Brown. And there's hardly a thing that I could say that she hasn't already said to a million more people. But one thing that I appreciate about it is that everyone has their story, everyone has their
Mm.
audience. There are going to be people who, similar to me perhaps, aren't going to listen to Brene Brown the same way they would listen to someone like me.
That's
And
right.
I'm not trying to capture Brene Brown's audience. I'm simply trying to beat that drum along with her and saying
Yeah.
we need more courage. That's
Yes.
that's a big piece of the puzzle for just about everybody. So to
Yes.
wrap things up, Patty, let me ask you, what does courage mean to you?
My favorite podcasts do this. Do you ask that at the end of every interview?
This is the one that I always do so far, yeah.
Yes, I love when podcast hosts do this. I love that you do that. Oof, what does courage mean to me? Oh, I'm so tempted to use there's this other podcast that I love, We Can Do Hard Things by Glennon Doyle. So, oh, I'm so tempted to quote her, which I will do quickly, and then I'll give you a legit
Okay,
answer from me.
please.
Um, but the way that Glennon Doyle talks about courage is when you're outside, how you present to the world matches your inside,
Hmm,
how you want to present to the world. And that's courage.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so good, right? I can't take credit for it.
Hmm. Well, it's funny because I spent a whole season with my wife Miranda, us going back and forth talking about our personal core values. We identified top 10,
Hmm.
and my number one is courage, and my number two is integrity. So you can see how, just in that quote, I'm hearing a lot of overlap and
Yeah,
intertwining between those concepts,
yeah,
which is what we've been talking about this whole episode about
yeah,
increasing integrity, increasing courage.
yeah. Yeah, integrity is hard. Integrity takes courage, I find, almost always. And so maybe for me, my own authentic answer to that question has something to do with that, which is those moments where it's so much easier to not live in integrity, or what more often happens, to live it, but only inside, only
Hmm.
quietly, only
Hmm.
when I'm alone with myself. Courage is showing up at louder volume,
Hmm.
at full volume.
Patty, you're speaking to my heart because what I've said to my wife and others over these past 3 years, developing a coaching practice and doing things my way, is I've had to learn how to live out loud. That's how I've said it, but that's exactly what you just said too. Thank
Mhm.
you for that.
Mm. Thank you for asking.
Hmm. Patty, is there anything else that listeners need to hear?
Oh, we covered so much ground.
Hmm. What
I
parting
don't
thoughts
think
would you give to
so.
them?
I think that was I think that was a really great note to end on already, which is, the parting thought of what would it feel like to live out loud, as you say, or turn up to 100% volume or even 110% volume in all of your life, in how you show up, in work, in relationships, in friendships, at home, what would that feel like? And then can you have the courage today, even in the next hour, even to identify your circle of what's comfortable and then step out of it just for one step
Hmm.
so that you can start turning that volume up.
Thank you for that, Patty, because you just reminded me. I often get some feedback about making sure there's an action that listeners can take. That is beautiful because I'm going to go do that right after this. Thank you.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, will you share with us how you're going to do that, Sam? To put you
Out of
on the spot?
integrity, I must. Yes. I'll make sure to share that for people to see. But Patti Chan, thank you for coming on the show. Where can people connect with you?
People can connect with me on LinkedIn. I
Mm.
am Patti Chan on LinkedIn/Patti Chan.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have a website and monthly newsletter that you can subscribe to. It's a newsletter for busy leaders. It's a mid-month pick-me-up to fuel you to the end of the month. And you can subscribe for that also at pattichan.com.
Wow, thank you again. I'm Sam, the Courage Coach for Executives, and remember, it starts with you.